Hi, guys. Welcome to The Social Block, the podcast that explores the intersection between blockchain technology and society. Today's episode is about DeFi. We cover a brief history of DeFi, the latest trend in DeFi circulating around points for airdrops and potentially other benefits. We also talked a lot about yield trading, which is probably one of the latest innovations in the space. To bring us through that DeFi jungle, so to speak, we have Dan, who is head of growth at Pendle.
Yeah, cool. I'm Dan from Pendle, and I lead the growth team. In Pendle, I guess before this I was mostly in TradFi. I think it's a pretty common transition for most people in crypto, and Pendle is actually my first crypto stint. But ever since I've started joining Pendle during its founding days back in early Jan 2021, never looked back since. Crypto has been a pretty fun space. And a little bit more about Pendle. We are a yield trading protocol where you can pretty much trade the yield of any given asset. Basically gives you more control over your yield over any yield-bearing assets out there in crypto or anything that generates yield. And that also, yield's not limited to just yield. It also includes everything that's receivables from the token. So, for example, like airdrops or points, those can now be traded on Pendle. What that allows is you can either forego all of those and just get fixed yield for certainty, or you can lever up those yields and points because of the other party who has foregone their yields and points. You give it to people who speculate on those yields and points. And yeah, that's kind of 2 cents of what we do.
Oh God, that's there's just so much in there, and so just to put all my cards on the table, I'm not super knowledgeable about DeFi. Like I know the basics, but I'm not very into the space. So I was thinking because a lot of our listeners probably also aren't super deep into DeFi, we could start. Like, can you explain kind of like the basics of yield farming? And where like that aspect of DeFi, the whole yield situation in the DeFi space.
Sure. I think that's kind of a high level thing, but I think it just kind of boils back to just traditional finance in general. Assets generates yield or interest, as you call it. The whole idea of money started from people, bartering, trading items from one another, and then moving on to having banks to borrowing and lending, and these would have interest, and that is what sparks the financial industry of the world, basically. And I think for crypto is also the same thing. Yield started off from lending on money markets. You lend funds on crypto and other people borrow, and then you earn yields on top of it. And then it evolved to providing liquidity for people to trade assets, and you earn yield on top of it. And now there's a bunch of different things where you can earn yields on top of things, kind of same thing as traditional finance you see. And I think yield farming in DeFi is pretty much the same thing, where you put an asset somewhere productive and you earn yield, either natively from fees or other protocols might incentivize it with their own protocol tokens. And I think nowadays what we see is not only yield farming, there's also points farming, where you deposit your assets into somewhere productive and you earn points on top of the yields that you're getting. But points can be eventually be redeemed or converted to something else. Can be anything. Can be airdrops or can be perks from the protocol. Can be anything.
Yeah, I feel like this is such that's
Yeah.
the latest trend. I feel like in DeFi right now, it's like points, right? When did it start, and like where did it start from? Like,
I think there's no definite point in time where it started, but there's a lot of protocols that have done that in the past. But right now it's super hype. Blur did that a while ago, and some other protocols like Manta did it, but not really in points, but in terms of like NFT collectibles. And now EigenLayer launched, and EigenLayer was very hype, and they did a point system, and they kind of cement that points are a thing in crypto now, and it's been kind of a trend nowadays for new protocols to launch points first. It's sort of like buying a loyalty program for the protocol to kind of establish early traction for whatever they want to use it for.
Yeah, I feel like the point system, it's more popular in the more DeFi protocol area, but it's also applicable to, if you're a centralized institution running on blockchain as well. Like you can also have a point system exactly because it incentivizes loyalty and it can be redeemable for all sorts of stuff. I hate the word stuff because it's so unspecific. But what do you think points are like mostly being redeemed for? Because you said it could be anything, but I feel like it's mostly airdrops, mostly tokens.
Yeah, for now it's mostly airdrops and tokens, but I'm pretty sure down the line, I'm more like I think people are expecting points to be airdrops, and I think because of that expectations, most protocols kind of are forced to convert points into airdrops. But down the line, once airdrops are done, they will likely still have points on board, and they will have to be more creative on what the points can be. It can be anything but a protocol. Actually, it depends on what the protocol do.
Yeah, like so any kind of perks, like I'm looking at it from like a CeFi actually perspectives. Like if you have points and like say now you've dropped some, like you've had your whatever for the first points and people have points left over, you can like have a promo with the rest of the points and be just like, well, now you can get lower borrowing rates with your points and something like that. Like you can really do anything. But yeah, it's a very interesting trend. And I was reading about it and I was like, it's just because it stands as an intermediary between the protocols as they are now and the tokens. Like, before it was like, the protocols, the foundations and the airdrop. And now that there's this point system in between. And we even had a discussion internally with some of my colleagues. Have you encountered any protocols where they're not calling it points, they're calling it something else? Like, I don't know. Because
for sure. There's many of them. I mean, Kelp DAO calls it miles, like airline miles.
Yeah, airline miles, exactly.
Swell calls them pearls, like oyster pearls. And yeah, I mean, but they all work the same way. You collect certain number of points, like quote unquote points, and you potentially get something out of it. And yeah, they all work the same way.
Yeah. Do you find that with most protocols, like that people know, because you said people are expecting them to be redeemable for an airdrop, for tokens, but do you find that people are like, I don't know, do they know always when they're like farming for points, so to speak, do they know what they're getting from the get-go? Or is it that most protocols are just like, we're going to give you points and then it's unclear exactly what's going to happen? Like, what's the level of certainty?
No one knows, honestly. But I would think that crypto market participants kind of expect that it's an airdrop, and because everyone expects an airdrop, the protocols are kind of forced for it to be an airdrop. Because if they don't, everyone farming points might feel a little bit cheated. So they kind of put themselves in a position where they're forced to do an airdrop. But that aside, I'm pretty sure most crypto participants are not that dumb. They know that if they force these protocols into an airdrop, they will do it, and they also know that there's potentially something else aside from airdrops as well. I think market participants should already be expecting it. But that said, it's crypto. No one knows what everyone thinks here.
Yeah, what's really interesting about what you said, like the whole time, you were kind of framing it as if the market participants, the actual crypto holders, the user is controlling the space, which I think is just so descriptive of crypto. It's like the participants decide what has to happen because you're always just like, yeah, they're just going to kind of force their hand into an airdrop because that's what they want. So I think that like for our listeners, this is a really, really special thing to note about crypto, that you have a lot more control and like I don't want to say you can pressure certain organizations into getting what you want, but you have such a loud voice that it actually makes a difference, where I feel like in TradFi, it doesn't matter. You're just being kicked around by these really rich institutions. So, I feel like it makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask something else about the points and the airdrops, but I forgot. Oh, no. I'll probably remember halfway through. Can we like rewind a little bit back to DeFi and the whole like DeFi thing? Because I feel like there might be a lot of people listening to this podcast who have followed DeFi very on a surface level throughout the years, like myself. But like, what's the state of DeFi right now? Like, what's its State of the Union address?
Yeah, and honestly speaking, I think right now the most hyped thing around is still points. Aside from it will be BTC L2, but I'm not too familiar with the BTC L2 space at the moment. Haven't been following too closely, but DeFi right now I think is much more mature than what it was in the last bull run. Given that most protocols have much better risk management right now, the user experience of interacting with protocols are much better. Things are generally in a much better shape right now, but we are not seeing the TVL inflow like what we saw back in 2021. We haven't seen that big inflow yet. So I guess the high level trust from the general market is not there yet. People are still kind of skeptical, but I do see that things are continuing to improve at a much faster rate right now. Yields are starting to pick up. External money is starting to pour in. So in general, I think DeFi is at a really good state right now, and I think we're still pretty early in the overall uptrend for this year and next year.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think it's this very early days for this bull run, and I think people were expecting that just because Bitcoin shot up to an ATH, all of the coins were supposed to shoot up to their ATHs as well, which I just don't think is the case, because if you think back to like the previous bull runs, that's not how it worked. Like Bitcoin would go up, reach an ATH, go down, and then only when it was like significantly so absurdly up was everything else like really performing and like having its own really lifespan. So I think people are just kind of expecting too much, and they're so hyped from the last bull run that they don't realize that it's early days, guys. I remembered what I was going to ask. But yeah, so kind of sorry for like jumping from topic to topic, especially to our listeners. They're probably just like, but for the airdrops, we were talking about how the points are called different things, and you mentioned the pearls and the miles and everything. And what do you think is the role of like these like narratives and storytelling, like all that creativity that goes into creating DeFi ecosystems? And because it just made me think, even like Manta, I remember, they had all their like, the water creatures and stuff. And that was really interesting. And I know that draws me in because I'm inherently very childish, and I just like cool pictures, and it's so gamified. Like, what's the role of the narrative and the gamification in DeFi right now?
I think
how important is
it? Differentiate what they provide. Yeah, I think it's just more to differentiate what they provide. But personally, I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's just overcomplicating designs. I think in general, protocols should keep things simple and just keep things as straightforward as possible. The simpler you design your protocol mechanics, the more easily understood it is, the more participants you can attract. The more caveats you put into your terms and conditions, the more layers of complexity you put, the more people are going to be dissuaded from using a protocol. I'm not too big of a fan of it. But then protocols are also sort of incentivized to differentiate themselves from others. They want to call it points because everyone else calls it points. They want to call themselves something else. And then they introduce a layer of NFT on top of it. And then they'll introduce another layer of points on top of it. They introduce a tokenized version of the points on top of it. All this kind of makes things very, very complicated. And to a new user coming in, seeing all these layers might be put off. But in terms of protocol design, I'm not a big fan of it, but I think protocols kind of like to do that to differentiate themselves. So yeah, there are pros and cons to both, but personally, I'm not too big of a fan.
It's a marketing thing. And the reason I asked is because right now, like we're planning, our next big campaign. It's, big on tokenomics and stuff at Nexo. And we're not DeFi, but like we're still in the space. And there's actually it's like an internal war zone, and it drives me crazy because I'm on the communications PR side and I work with marketing, and then you've got the product side. And product really want us to be the very like DeFi. They want to do exactly that thing of like gamify everything. They want to wrap it in a very gamified, very, animations, pictures, treasure hunts. You get the point. Whereas when we started actually on the marketing side, like I was in like quite a few brainstorm meetings talking about, how we can wrap this new campaign and initiative for users on our platform in terms of like loyalty and stuff, how we can wrap it into like an interesting gamified concept. We spent like 5 meetings of an hour and a half to 2 hours talking about it, and we couldn't find a gamified concept that didn't feel exactly like what you were saying, that we're layering. It's like a concept within a concept within a concept, and we were so concerned that people are going to get lost because, it's a point system, but we're calling it something else. It's going to look really snazzy, but you have to go through like a whole new level of snazziness in the app and the website to get to the crux of it. And it's kind of like, I'm really surprised this happened actually, but the communications and marketing people were like, no, we don't want to make this like a big story, like a big thing. We just want like a simplified, lean, polished concept. And the product people being like, but no, you need to really gamify it and make it really fun. And it needs to look really basically flashy for people, because that's what everything when you do in DeFi is doing. But yeah, we came to the same conclusion as you. Like I personally, I really like the gamified concept, and this is the thing that I think really broke us as like a, well, it didn't really break us, but like we were just really bummed about it because we are the creative people in the PR and marketing little side, and we really wanted to do something creative, but it broke our hearts that like creative meant that more people were likely to not understand. So I do get what you're saying.
It's true.
But on the other hand, like
there are definitely successful ones that are complex, but it's more like I feel like it's a moonshot if you want to really go for a very complex campaign, and want to make it a success. I think that's a pretty hard bet.
It's hard, and like you don't have a guarantee for results. And ultimately, like we're looking for results, and we're looking to cater to, we have 7 million users to cater to, and that's very different from like. Also, I think like being a CeFi institution kind of makes it a bit different for us, because in DeFi, I think a lot of people are a hell of a lot more savvy than, a lot of people going into CeFi. Like we have a lot of like great savvy investors as well, but a lot of the more mainstream people who are only just taking their baby steps into, blockchain and crypto are there. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience, kind of trying to draw inspiration from DeFi and that level of it. So on the more like Pendle specific side, I read some stuff in like some of your papers, some of your documentation about how exactly the platform works, what you guys do. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. I think it's a little bit complex for me to run through all the mechanics, but I think you can just give a high level idea of what we are. We are again, especially just now, a yield trading protocol where you trade the yield of any yield bearing asset. I think using an example would make more sense. So let's use a rental yield as an example, although we don't really support that at the moment. Let's say you buy a house. Let's say a house costs $1 million, and annual rental yield is about 10%, 100K. What we do essentially is we split this rental yield, or like the yield of an asset, away from the principal of the asset. So you kind of split one asset into two parts: the yield token, which is the receivables, all the yields from that asset, and the principal token, which is the principal value.
And that's split on your protocol, like on your platform.
Yeah, it is split on our platform. Now, the splitting part is not the interesting part. The interesting part is you can trade these tokens that are already split. So you can buy and sell YT, or you can buy and sell PT. Now, back to the property example. Again, let's say you don't have $1 million, you have $200,000 in your savings, and you're sure as hell that the rental yield in this area is going to go up. And with $200,000 in the bank, you can't buy a house, and you cannot capitalize on the increase in the rental yield that you know. But what you can do instead, that the rental is going to go up. How about you can just buy the rental portion of that yield? You buy that $100,000 income that that will happen. Let's say you pay $110,000 for that position, and the rental yield really goes up, and it actually went up to $200,000 in that year. What happened is you paid $110,000 for YT, the yield of that asset, and it generates $200,000. So you profited by $90,000. So that's pretty good. So on the other side of the coin, you have the principal side, which does not generate yield. Now remember, the principal and the yield make up the whole of the asset, which means the sum of the value is the asset itself. And of course, you can't just split this forever. There's a maturity attached to it, where at maturity, the YT stops generating yield and the PT becomes whole again, which means the final value of the principal token is known, which means there's a fixed yield attached to it. So investors who are, looking for safe havens or excessive yields, or rather looking for fixed yield and certainty until maturities, they can just simply buy it into the PT assets, which is the principal value of the asset. Now, again, these are all native yields from the underlying protocols. We're not printing any additional yields or incentives or anything. It's just how we split yield from yield-bearing assets. This is not a new concept. It's been done in TradFi before, called strips, where they strip away the coupon away from the coupon bond. It's a very common asset, I would say. Again, imagine you strip away the rental income from a property, or the dividend from a stock, or the bank interest from a bank deposit, or literally anything. It's a pretty common. It's a pretty common asset class, mostly for bonds, but because of how composable DeFi is, you kind of extend that same.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's happened so late
to all yield-bearing assets.
Like, I'm honestly surprised this didn't take place earlier, given that it's like a financial instrument in and of itself in TradFi.
I wouldn't say it's late, but I would think that makes more sense when yield markets mature. You need to have a very established yield market, or rather, like, established form of yield-bearing asset, where lending markets have pretty stable yields, and like people are comfortable with the idea of yields from LP tokens, from any kinds of yield, for that matter, for people to start knowing that, okay, it makes sense for us to build a derivative on top of yields. And that's kind of how Pendle idea started, actually. Back in 2020, when we saw a bunch of food coins printing out 4 or 5 digit APYs, and we were thinking, how do we fix that yield? Because those yields were fleeting in a week or two. And we figured to look into ways for us to start fixing that yield, but there weren't any solutions in DeFi. So then we decided, okay, this might be a hole for us to patch, and then that's how the Pendle idea started, actually.
Nice. And how do you see that evolving over time? Because I feel like it leans very heavily into both the financial instruments from TradFi that you already mentioned, but it also leans really into all the fractionalizing. In general, the blockchain space likes to be able to split ownership into so many different parts, and now it's not just equal fungible parts. It's different parts with different function, which I find really cool. It's not like you have half a Bitcoin. It's like you have the principal and the yield of an asset, which are different. They're not two fungible parts of an asset, which is really cool. And I think people will really come into understanding that since we somehow managed to understand NFTs, after 4 years, there's the mass of people know what an NFT is. I remember in 2020 when everybody just didn't get it, which I think was cool. But how do you see yield trading evolving in the DeFi and the blockchain and the financial space in general? And how do you see finance changing because of that?
Yeah, might be biased because we're working in that industry. But if you look at the amount of notional volume settled in traditional finance in general, majority of the volume is settled in interest rate swaps or interest rate trading per se. So rates trading have been very commonplace in TradFi. It's just that it requires a mature rates market to be present first before that derivative kind of flourish. I think in Pendle we foresee the same thing in crypto. Yields will be the main driver of growth in crypto, of course, aside from just general crypto adoption. And yeah, we do foresee that the yields trading space to be much larger than the spot trading space, mimicking the trajectory from traditional finance. And I think we're very optimistic in that direction, and we're very likely going to keep moving forward and just keep building out the interest rate markets in DeFi.
That's interesting. And this is coming from, I think, especially for our listeners who are not into DeFi, it's interesting to think of how it started. And obviously, you had, first Bitcoin coming into existence, and then you had, I feel like DeFi's roots were kind of in that initial, the DAO. And then MakerDAO started coming in and, offering lending on DeFi. And then there was DeFi Summer, which was, I think, when yield farming started. And now we're at yield trading. So I think it can get so much more complex. So it's just really, really interesting DeFi timeline. What about trends you see in the broader blockchain space that you think are going to I don't know, also kind of creep into the DeFi space? Is there anything that you see coming from outside in?
There's a big trend. I won't say the big trend, but like uh, people are trying to bring on-chain stuff, sorry, off-chain stuff on-chain. So we call it
Real world,
real assets.
yeah.
Yeah, the kind of trend here. But people, I think there's a lot of regulatory hurdles to go through here, but I think someone will eventually figure out how to navigate through this complex space. Yeah, and we do see a lot of protocols are attempting to break into this space. I feel like the first person to actually do it right might get a pretty sizable market share in a free to attractive industry. Yeah, I think that's one thing that I'm very much looking forward to, just bringing off-chain assets on-chain and make it accessible to the masses, to the whole world without, being gated by currencies or countries or anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one, like, regulation I think is really important. I was really hesitant whether to like broach the subject because I know a lot of people in DeFi especially, they don't even want to talk about it because the whole point of DeFi was to be really borderless and, not to have like an owner or necessarily, of the protocol that like controls everything. And I think that like regulation kind of coming in and targeting DeFi, which like has been happening across, the states and everything. And I think that kind of, I don't want to say it broke DeFi spirit, but I think it was a bit of a downer for the space. How do you think that founders like yourself for, DeFi protocols are going to navigate regulation? Because I feel like it is going to turn to DeFi. Like they're not just going to be like, nah, we're gonna let them do their thing.
Yeah, for sure. But it's like trying to regulate DeFi is like trying to regulate the internet. It's not really that possible, isn't it? Um, you you can regulate a protocol to be able to provide certain amount of certain assets and only provide the UI access to certain jurisdictions. But again, if people want to figure out a way to access a protocol, you might get this VPN or something else. But I think the beauty of it is it's not only just the beauty of blockchain is not only just it's open for everyone, even if it is close to a certain region, close to a certain group of people. The thing what makes blockchain cool is that it's immutable and there's no accounting fraud possible in a blockchain just because everything is accessible for everyone. And not accessible for everyone, but everyone can verify what's in the blockchain and you can know for a fact that cannot be false. And I think that's like the main use case of blockchain, the fact that it's immutable. The regulation parts I can't really comment on that because I personally have no idea where the direction of regulation is going to go to. Are they going to regulate the chain? Are they going to regulate the miners? Are they going to regulate the DeFi providers or like even any other part of blockchain?
I have a theory for that.
We don't know.
And it's they're going to regulate. They're going to regulate the thing or the people that they're most able to find and are going to be few enough of them. Like that's. And I really feel strongly about that because I feel like the whole reason that like Gary Gensler is all like everything except for Bitcoin is a security and stuff, which was like ages ago at this point. And it's because you can find a founder or a leader for almost every project, I guess, except for Bitcoin because, Satoshi has disappeared irrevocably and wisely so. And I think that that's what it's about. It's like they're going to regulate something if they can find someone to regulate, someone to be accountable.
Yeah, but there's nothing there to regulate, isn't it? Like, what do they want out of the regulation? And I think that's kind of been repeatedly echoed by quite a few crypto companies out there. Coinbase is in the forefront of fighting against this regulation. And I think they've been pretty clear. Like, we are very open to work with the SEC and the government, but it's just that they haven't really provided a guideline for them
exactly.
to operate in.
And this is the thing, it's like Coinbase want to fight for regulation. They don't want to fight against it. It's just that, like you said, there isn't that regulation. And this is why I'm so happy that we have the MICA coming in Europe, because there's going to be hurdles to jump over. There's going to be considerations to make, but it's actually like, because like our legal team has prepared some materials for us internally and they're always like keeping us in the loop of like what's going to be expected of us with this regulation and stuff. So we actually are aware. And I'm like, well, yeah, there's going to be some things that are going to be tough. There's going to be some things where we're going to have to wait for approvals, but ultimately there's going to be clarity, and that's just so much better than what's happening in the US where I just feel like Oh my God. I have no idea actually what they want. And I don't think Coinbase know what they want either in terms of like, what does the SEC want from them?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely a tough spot to be in. It's never really fun to deal with regulators, but I think eventually it is something needed. And I mean, to get the trust of the majority of the public who don't even know blockchain exists, I think regulations at the end of the day is for good. It's just because of the world that we're living in. Everything is generally regulated, and once it's regulated, it's deemed as safe by
And then it goes
by the people.
mainstream
So
and yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just gonna ask because you're based in Singapore, right? No, I got that right. Like when you're just walking around Singapore, this is like a personal curiosity that started recently. When you're just walking around Singapore, like, you know, chatting with your friends and stuff, like what percentage of them would you say are aware of blockchain? Because you just said it's like most people don't even know what blockchain is. But I think that varies so drastically from jurisdiction, country to country. It's just like my regulatory brain was switched on there. Like when you're just in Singapore, how many people know about crypto and blockchain? How many people have crypto operate in the space?
I don't have the numbers in mind.
Oh no,
but,
just like from your
I mean,
experience, I guess. Like,
yeah, for sure. It's just more like people know what Bitcoin is, but people don't know what it is. If you know what I mean. Like they've heard about it.
they've heard about it, but they don't know what
exactly
it is.
how. Yeah, but exactly how it works. Why it's immutable? Why is Bitcoin Bitcoin? You know, people don't really look into it because people are not curious about it. But frankly, I don't think they should. It's not something that they have to know. Like people don't have to know how money works. They just need to know they can pay with it. But the entire monetary system of the country and the economies of the world, they don't have to know about it. Same thing for Bitcoin. I feel people know that it's an asset, but people have no idea what it is.
I don't know. I kind of disagree with like I'm just so conflicted on this because I agree with people who are just kind of like, yeah, we need to like remove the word blockchain from, you know, the front end side of, you know, our products because the blockchain is the infrastructure. The user isn't interested in that. They're interested in how much faster, cheaper, better it is for them. And we should be talking about that. And I'm just like, I agree with that on some level, but on another level, I have a huge problem with like the unchecked centralization going around the world. There's so much, I don't know. I feel like people are just kind of like in this inertia that isn't necessarily beneficial to the mass population of late capitalism and like huge rich institutions that, you know, just basically can kick us around. And that's why I'm just kind of like, I feel like they should know like what it actually is and how it, like why it is. I don't think everybody should necessarily know the nitty gritty tech, but they should know why we should migrate to like this different infrastructure. So I'm very torn on that.
Sure.
I'm just so torn.
Yeah, I think as you know, we're both in crypto, so I think we feel like everyone should know what it is and should understand the beauty of it. But again, so if I think something should happen, doesn't necessarily mean that it can possibly happen because people are, again, let's face it.
You said it. They're not curious. They're not curious.
That people should know. Yeah, exactly. It's not curious. It's not relevant for their life. You can't expect, you know, a musician to want to know how Bitcoin works. Some do, of course, but I mean, if it's not relevant to their life, they don't really have to know all of this because that's not relevant to what they want. It is something that the finance people want, or the people who are into decentralization and, you know, immutability want. And you and I are interested in it, but majority of people, I would say, not even like more than 99% of the world population wouldn't even care about it.
Yeah, on a good level though, that means that I feel like we are moving towards a shift with all these people in blockchain and this like basically new form of finance. Yeah, maybe it matters to us like who controls your money. I like the very first episode of this podcast was called "Who Owns Your Money," because I don't feel like holding my funds in fiat. I don't feel like I own my money. I feel very vulnerable. I feel a lot of things that are not good. But anyway, the reason like we care about who owns our money and like I like to say like who owns your money, who owns your ass, is that I hope that one day there's enough of us that we like actually push this through to everybody. So like you said, that they won't have to care, but the infrastructure will be okay because enough people did care. So I just think it's about a critical mass and about kind of flipping things around. But yeah, that's it's a good thing. I had a thought while you were speaking, and it was more Pendle specific, because I got a question. I think it was yesterday. I was running the AMA for Nexo right before we recorded this, and I got a lot of questions about how we list assets, what assets we list, and you mentioned that you don't necessarily support like any asset right now in the DeFi ecosystem that's earning yield. Can you explain how you decide what assets to support and not to support?
I think it's more like more about resource allocation internally. If we can support every single asset in the world, we would. But there's no standard for yield-bearing assets like there is standard for tokens. Like Uniswap can be as permissionless as they are in letting people create a liquidity pair and let people trade. It's because there's an ERC20 token standard for tokens in general. NFTs have standards, and just why OpenSea can have an open market for any kinds of NFT, and other NFT marketplaces have no open market for NFTs. Again, Pendle takes in yield-bearing assets, and there's no standard for that, and we kind of have to build a custom contract to be able to support different yield-bearing assets. We try our best to make things as standardized as possible. Technically, the protocol is permissionless, so if engineers know how to deploy contracts and how to set up a liquidity pool, they can. But again, do you consider it permissionless when only a select few who understands how to create smart contracts can create a pool? Not really. So
that's an interesting thought, actually.
Trying to solve that. Yeah, we are trying to solve that. And again, to your question, why are we not supporting what goes to the thought process and supporting? Of course, mostly resource allocation. If an asset can generate as much volume as possible, if we think that assets can generate much volume or have some positive value proposition for us, yeah, we'll support it for sure. But do we want to be permissionless and let any yield-bearing assets be tradable on Pendle? Also, yes. But again, there's no standard to yield-bearing assets, and it's a matter of us prioritizing that. And how do we make assets listing and creation on Pendle as seamless as possible, even to non-developers, and that's still a problem that has yet to be solved, not only by us but like just for industry as a whole, because there's no standard for yield-bearing assets. We do try to make our own standard, and we did it with our own EIP. We call it standardized yield, but then again, still waiting for adoption. I don't think that you can consider that a standard if Pendle is the only one adopting it, but we are trying to get more people to adopt.
You got to start somewhere, right?
The standard. Yeah, there's ERC 4626, but ERC 4626 is a pretty good standard for yield-bearing assets, but I feel like it is not applicable to a lot of yield-bearing assets. So let's say a yield-bearing asset that supports multiple tokens in deposits doesn't work anymore. Yield-bearing assets that distributes other forms of token or the rewards token or incentives that are not natively baked in also doesn't support it. So here's a good standard for one specific type of yield-bearing asset, but again, there are of course obviously many ways of generating yield. And again, now we have points. So points are completely off-chain, and we can't really make that permissionless because we got to work with the underlying protocols for the points distribution mechanics to work. You can't really be permissionless if the underlying mechanics behind the yields or points are off-chain. So at the end of the day, as much as we want to support everything out there, it's not that possible in terms of resource allocation.
Yeah, I do get that because we have the same, it's not a problem, but on Nexo as well, when we're integrating assets, exactly like you said, because not all assets are ERC20 tokens, right? So every time we're working with a new blockchain, an asset that lives on a different chain, to make the integration fully possible, like what we do is like we list things quite quick, but to have like people be able to send, say, Solana directly from Nexo to, a Solana non-custodial wallet, whatever, we need to like create that whole integration, and that takes time, and it's, again, a matter of internal resource, and there's just so many assets. So we have the exact same issue, but we also talk a lot about like we feel a certain responsibility for what we're listing, so we do try to like vet tokens, and we have a whole system because and I think this is like where we're not necessarily like you guys are going in the different direction. You want that full freedom, right? And I think this is the beauty of the space, and this is why I like that there's DeFi, there's CeFi, there's so many, like, you can really choose the spectrum of, I guess, self-sovereignty that you want to have. And because in DeFi, like, if everything is permissionless, like, you want to have, I'm kind of paraphrasing here and like obviously blowing things a bit out of proportion, but you want to be permissionless enough so that you can like list and have as many assets available as possible, which gives people maximum freedom to do exactly whatever they want and need. And, then there's like kind of institutions that are in the middle that are kind of like, we have like a semi-conservative approach, and then you have your really conservative institutions. So you can choose your level of safety and help and freedom. It's kind of like the security to freedom index, isn't it? Like spectrum
Yeah, for sure.
to pick whatever you want. So do you have any like assets that you're particularly excited about, or anything like in the DeFi space that like you're particularly excited about right now as like a, I don't want to say a trend because we already talked about the trend, it's points, but anything that you want to share with our listeners that's super, super hot right now and interesting?
Nothing in particular. I think again, I can't really comment on what was super hot what I think is super hot right now, but what is super hot right now would be BTC L2s. But then again, I think the market is in a cool down phase at the moment, so everything's really quiet for now as the market takes a little bit of a breather from the insane run we've had the past couple of months. But again, there are a few narratives coming up. I think Carrack as an EigenLayer competitor would be pretty interesting, considering EigenLayer just recently announced their snapshot. I'll expect liquidity to flow a little bit to Carrack and some Carrack ecosystem to start making a little bit of noise in the market. Aside from that, BTC L2s are pretty talked about. There's Merlin, there's Botanics, there's quite a couple more. But I think these are the two main narratives that we're seeing, and I think that again, considering Pendle, we just built on top of yield-bearing assets. Anything if it generates yield, it can be integrated into Pendle. So that's kind of the mentality that we hold. If we see that anything is potentially hype, yeah, we'll go over there for sure.
Nice. Here's an interesting one, and I know that you may not be able to answer this because you don't like necessarily do KYC and stuff like in DeFi. But I was interested in like who you think your main audience is, like who is using Pendle, like what kind of investor? Maybe from like your
Sure.
community channels or something.
Yeah, I think I can just share a little bit of
Demographic information essentially.
In a sense, but we look through our users' addresses quite often and kind of get a general sentiment of the level of sophistication, or rather how sophisticated they are as a DeFi participant. But sort of the data that we found is pretty interesting. The majority of the users participating in Pendle, so like 80% of the people participating in Pendle are, I would say, pretty small, participate pretty small amounts. But the majority of the capital in Pendle actually come from these top 20% of like the 80%.
That's always the case, though. 20% is even a lot. It's usually like the top 10%.
Yeah, and I mean, 80-20 is sort of like a number that I plucked out of my ass, but can be you get the point. The interesting thing is, for the sophisticated users, they can range between institutions we are in touch with and who have reached out to us, or just whales or just crazy DeFi participants. I think it's kind of a good mix of everyone. But again, back to how Pendle works, right? There's two sides of the coin. One is the YT side, which is speculates on the yield, and one is the PT side, which is the fixed yield. And you can kind of see users diverging into two different parts here, based on the wallet, and how they interact with other DeFi protocols. The degens, big money or small money, same thing. They all go to the YT side. They speculate on yield and they buy up, leverage up the yield positions. The whales institutions who are looking for something more fixed and more predictable go for PT when they earn fixed yield over there. And I think it's good to see that dichotomy kind of plays out in Pendle, and that there's something for everyone. And people who are in between, who are not really that risk averse, but also not big of a risk taker as well, they provide liquidity to facilitate these trades. So I think it's kind of like a long way of answering your question. We have everyone in the platform, and things even mix of everyone, just because of how the protocol works. Caters to degens, cater for people who want safe yields, and given our size and our TVL, I think we can support trades of a much bigger size now. So even institutions are now on board as well.
Interesting. The only thing that kind of sparks like a question in my head, and I was thinking about this earlier, but I was like, I'm not going to ask stupid questions, but screw it, I'm asking a dumb question. So right now, Pendle is, you guys mostly have, I guess, like fungible assets. So when you separate the principal from the yield part of, the asset, right? You don't necessarily need to put the same 2 and 2 back together, to have that ownership. But then what happens if like you have non-fungibles? Is that even like possible? Because we were talking about the real estate example earlier, which is essentially a non-fungible asset, right?
You can make a non-fungible asset fungible by just creating an index out of it. I mean, real estates are non-fungible, but REITs are. And you can basically make an index out of it. So like individual shares of different companies are not fungible with one another, but you create an index, an S&P 500 index, for example. And now suddenly everything is in one basket. So there are ways to work around it, but is it really that same asset? No, probably not. But yeah, to get to your question, there can be engineering hacks to do in blockchain terms, but like in finance terms, mostly, do you want to create an index out of it? Do you want to create a derivative out of it? It's pretty possible.
Okay, so yeah, there are ways. Essentially, it's I just feel like we're still far away from that on a use case level. Like at least within the blockchain space, like it's just we're not tokenizing real world assets enough, RWA, to have that use case yet. I think it might come. But yeah, I was just curious, like, because it was just in the back of my head. I was like, what happens if you can't put the same 2 things together because different people have them? And so for a very DeFi newbie, like, how would you recommend that they kind of crawl into DeFi and like eventually reach Pendle?
It's kind of like an FA question, but I will say just try it out and read a lot. Understand how. I think understanding crypto culture is very important because the lingo is different, and just engross yourself in how people talk in crypto. Be involved in CT. Just be updated on everything. And I think if you want to be involved in Pendle, I think it's really easy. We have all of our education page available. Just go to app.pendle.finance. There's an education tab on top. Just navigate there and to get started and how to Pendle. It's not that difficult to say.
Why is it called Pendle? I was wondering about that. Like, why was it just like a name, or is there a reason?
Yeah, because yields swing back and forth like a pendulum.
Like a pendulum, so it's Pendle. Okay, that's so cute. I like that. Well, we're coming kind of to the end of the episode, and I always ask my guests if there's any last thoughts or like a message that they want to leave our listeners with right before we cut off.
Yeah, it's been a pretty good chat. Thanks a lot for having me. Check out Pendle. I think we have a lot more in store to come, especially at the end of this year. We've been building quite extensively for quite a few launches that are coming over the next couple of months. So yeah, do check it out.
So that was our episode for today with Dan from Pendle. I think it was really informative, and it was great to have like a real DeFi episode. And catch us next time on The Social Block.